Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. We're going to talk today about finishing those Christmas knits on time. Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. Let's get those Christmas knits finished on time. I've got lots of tips for you today on getting those knits finished, on making sure that you don't overpromise and try and do too much. And know that you can fit more knitting in if you take the time to prioritise. So let's take a look at those tips one at a time. And the first tip is just that. Focus on one knit at a time. It can be difficult to say, oh, I'm knitting 3 things at once, so I'm doing that one and I'm doing that one and I'm doing that one. So just take one and say, I will finish this. Then take another one and say, I will finish this. Then take another one and say, I will finish this. You'll find it easier rather than switching between methods, between patterns, because, I mean, even if you're using different patterns, then you'll be switching between different jargon preferences, the ways that designers write the patterns differently. So find one, start knitting it and finish knitting it, then start the next one, then start the next one. I know, like me, a few of you will like to have 2 or 3 things on your needles at once. But at this time of year, if you are trying to get a lot of knitting in, then it does work to actually prioritise one at a time. The second tip I have for you is to take time every day, just even if it's 15-20 minutes, to prioritise your knitting, to sit down and knit without distraction. Now this might be simply the fact that you switch your television off and knit, instead of knitting and Netflix. It might be that you say, if I go to bed and knit instead of go to bed and read, then I will have that 15 or 20 minutes every day when I can knit. You may even say, I'm going to bed early today because I need to knit. And especially if you've got people around the house who you're knitting for, that's a really easy and quick way to get knitting done without them seeing. So the third thing is, now, this is a really cool one that you just may not quite have thought of. Change the size of your yarn. If you're knitting a pair of mittens and they're using DK yarn, thin yarn, with 4mm needles, if you up the size of the yarn to Aran or chunky yarn, say you're using 6mm needles instead because it's a thicker yarn, suddenly you have fewer stitches, you have fewer rows, and you will get the knit finished quicker. Doesn't that sound cool? It will mean that all of those Christmas knits will be finished more quickly. You'll have fewer stitches in each item. And it can be as simple as, if you're knitting a pair of socks, don't use really thin lace weight, just move up a couple of grades of yarn and they will still be really cool, fine knitted socks. But they will just not quite be those really fine knitted socks with sock weight yarn. Just find a pattern that's with slightly thicker yarn. This is a great one, and this is how I suggest you knit anyway. This is knit in the order of learning. Knit in the order of complication. So if you're starting to knit and you're thinking, crikey, I've not knitted cables for ages. This is a really complicated knit, I'm really struggling with this. Well, go and find something that you've got on your Christmas knitting pile that's easy cables. You'll get used to it. You'll get used to knitting cables and then you'll go, that feels easier. And then what you were starting to knit that felt more complicated will again feel easier. So knit in the stages of how difficult the pattern is. And as you move towards Christmas, not only will your knitting improve because your techniques will improve, you get more used to more complicated patterns, but it will feel easier to finish each one, and each one will be finished more quickly because you won't be knitting complicated ones first and then easier ones. It will be the other way around. Now, I've mentioned this one before and it's one of my favourite things to say at Christmas when you're knitting. Knit only to realistic expectations, and promising someone that you'll knit them something for Christmas and then not giving it to them for 2 or 3 years. Believe me, I've known that to happen. And then saying, oh, I'll give it to you at Easter, because I haven't finished knitting it yet, then it can feel really guilt, this weight sitting on your shoulders. Oh, I'm really sorry I haven't finished yet. Oh, I'm really sorry I haven't finished yet. And realistic expectations can mean a lot this year because you may not actually see who you're knitting for. So It would be nice to send them a present if you haven't finished knitting, and if you haven't promised them something that's knitted, then you can send them something and they won't know that the knitting hasn't been completed. Right, now, in the UK, and I mean around the world as well, in the UK, in England at the moment, we are in lockdown. It's a very light lockdown, considering how some lockdowns around the world and how difficult the lockdown was earlier this year. It's a light lockdown. We're allowed to leave the house whenever we want to. It's just that things are closed and we're being told to stay at home most of the time if we can. Schools are still open, universities are still open, colleges are still open, etc, etc. So lockdown feels easier than it did last time. But if you're on a Zoom call with your family, a Zoom call with your friend, a Zoom call with your workmates, just to say hi, sit there and knit. You're not leaving the house, you haven't got to take it with you, you can sit there and knit. It's a great time to do it, especially if someone else really likes talking. Or if it's a work call and you don't have to take notes or anything like that, all the notes are going to get to you later. And it's the kind of conference call where nobody's video will be on apart from the presenter. Then you can take note of what they're talking about, but you can sit there and knit at the same time. Obviously, I'd say pick an easier knit when you're trying to focus on something else as well at the same time, but you could get quite a lot of knitting done during that time. Now, the last tip. Yes, we will need this most years, but also this year in particular, postal dates are important. Just take a note of them. And if you are going to meet with family in your bubble, or you are going to be able to say, let's get in the car and drop this off at people's doorsteps, then take note of those dates that you need to prioritise knits for. Prioritise those postal dates so that if you know that by the 10th or the 12th of December you've got to post this, you've got to make sure that it goes earlier, then get it organised and knit those first. Then you can prioritise what's next, and then you can prioritise what's next. If you want to knit in that order, you can also, if you're really organised, you can also set out those knits in priority by time when they're needed, alongside the other tip I gave you of priority of how difficult they are. So you really could get yourself set up, planned, spend an hour or two organising your knits so that they are postal dates alongside the difficulty of the knitting. And of course, there might be a point where you say, oh, we're not even swapping Christmas presents at Christmas, we're going to meet up in the new year. So you can prioritise that and knit that over Christmas. So those are the 7 tips I have for you, all about getting those Christmas knits finished and to the people who need them at Christmas. Hope you've enjoyed this. Do click on the link in the description to go and get your Christmas knitting planner. And of course, if you want to knit for yourself, you've finished all of your gifts, then there's the Christmas Bauble pattern as well. Do go and sign up for that too. All very Christmassy. The Christmas planner will help you organise which items you want to knit, who they're for, when you're going to knit them, what patterns you're going to use, what yarns you're going to use, and get it all organised and set so you can start. And then the Christmas Bauble, it's a free pattern. You can knit it with any yarn that you have hanging around. All you need is a little bit of stuffing. It's an easy pattern, it's knitted in garter stitch. So you create this beautiful Christmas decoration, knit them in all sorts of different colours. You can put them on a tree, hang them on the mantelpiece by the fire like I did last year. And yeah, have great fun with it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope I'll see you next week. Do hit subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and click on the bell for notifications. That will mean YouTube will let you know whenever there's a new video. I'm here every Tuesday, every week with a new knitty video right here for you. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again soon. Bye for now. Happy knitting.